Welcome back, everyone, to Soho Convo Episode 2. I'm here with Mark Talberg, an internet blogger and a very close and personal friend of mine. And given the situation that we find ourselves in historically, I thought it important to relay your past history, living in the region of Ukraine. You were born in Ukraine.
Correct.
Okay.
I'm several generations, like as far as I can trace it back, which is mid 19th century. Everybody was one way or another connected to different regions of Ukraine. Yes.
So, you started kind of discussing with me your thoughts on what's happening, and you brought up all these really interesting neutral opinions. You were highlighting a lot of the situation from a historical context that I have no experience in, and more importantly, most Americans don't have access to. You have real life lived experiences of being there personally, seeing the fall of communist Ukraine to the rise of the current nationalistic state since, I believe you left in 1991, right? Right when they formed.
Correct.
So I would really love to just get into a simple conversation of what your opinion is of going on, and more importantly, what it was like, the differences between the Ukraine that we see on television today compared to the Ukraine that was, that was there during your childhood.
Mm-hmm.
So let's bring it back to when you were a kid. I mean, what is the starkest difference you see between the images you see in Ukraine now and your lived experience being there?
It's beyond recognition. And you mentioned neutrality.
Yeah.
It's not neutrality. It's more like a child going through divorce of his or her parents.
Yeah.
I know firsthand. We have family with traditions.
Right.
My parents divorced, so when I grew up, I made sure my children have same experience. So, generation to generation, I have many successful marriages under my belt. So, yeah, we laughing, and I'm smiling, but it's more like nervous laughter because what's going on is very painful. It's inconceivable.
All right.
On February 23rd, which is a meaningful day for me. It's a Red Army Day. I had a lot of my ancestors, my grandpa, both grandfathers, actually, they were Red Army officers, and it always means a lot to me. And, I still keep their medals and all that, their archives. And on the 23rd of this year, if somebody told me something was going to happen, what happened on the 24th,
right?
I was in total denial, despite of what officials told here in the United States. The media, we take it with grain of skepticism.
Right.
I think most of us. I'd never imagine it happening.
Yeah.
I never condone a war, much less those, what just happened. There is no justification for, people dying and all this carnage what's going on in Ukraine. It shouldn't have happened. I think Russian leadership was ill-advised on that. But that said, I did not like the direction that Ukraine took starting 2014 after the coup that happened, West-inspired, West-encouraged, very violent.
Yeah. So you saw a departure in personality in 2014, but you just brought something up that I didn't even know was had any historical context, which was the 23rd of February, the day before the invasion started.
Right.
That's an important day.
It's a very important
day. So
the
Red
Day? It's Red Army Day.
What is that exactly?
After the October Revolution, which happened after the Russian defeat in World War I, old imperial army disintegrated, and in the face of German assault, new Bolshevik government had to create a new army. One of the prominent figures was Leon Trotsky. I'm sure you know who it is. He and his deputy Ephraim Sklansky can be credited as organizers of the Red Army. Later on, they were never mentioned, but it has, in my family, it has more to do with the legacy of Great Patriotic War, the war against Hitler.
Oh.
So, everybody, if you take 2 generations back,
Right.
it's, everybody, both of my grandfathers were decorated officers, who served with distinction. They were crippled. My maternal side grandfather was actually a distinguished honorary citizen of one of the Russian cities, had several medals and so on. And we always celebrated. Each year I take a shot of vodka in memory of those who died so we can live.
Wow.
So
So there was a lot of pride in this day. And this is, because a lot of our listeners really know very little about Ukraine, right? The only exposure that they have to this region is really the partial propaganda that we hear online, as well as the partial history of the region in itself. So, I would like to, as we get into these conversations, just highlight a little bit of those details so that those who are listening can understand the breadth of this historical location. So, okay, Red Army. There was a lot of pride being a Russian Ukrainian at this time and a member of the Red Army post World War I.
It depends from which background you come.
So it's ethnically kind of split.
In a way, yes, especially in western part. There are 2 Ukraines practically, and they are divided by Dnieper River. There is Eastern Ukraine, which is more Russian-leaning, more Russian-speaking. They speak their particular vernacular called Surzhyk, which is a mix of Russian and Ukrainian words. And there is a Western Ukraine, which was historically not a part of Russia. It's so-called Kingdom of Galicia and Lodomeria. Lvov, if you know that city of Lvov is in Russian, goes by different names. If you, for example, meet a Hasidic Jew, he has no idea what Lvov is, but if you say Lemberg, which is in German, they know immediately. It's a cradle of many civilizations, Polish, Jewish, Ukrainian. And that part was historically incorporated into Austrian Empire. So the cities of that part they're more German, Polish, Jewish. The countryside was Ukrainian. And those people who felt oppressed, they felt left behind. They were like, even in my times, we looked a bit down at Ukrainians. We were considering ourselves Soviets, more advanced, more modern, city boys, more into current trends, and those conservative village people, like American South, maybe 50 years ago, very religious, very devout. Being a religious person in Soviet Union wasn't welcome, but they were very persistent in keeping their traditions, their religion, celebrating religious holidays. If it's Easter or Christmas, Orthodox Christmas, and there is a hospital. My mom used to be a doctor in the hospital, so who is gonna stay, who's gonna work on Christmas? People with Jewish names.
Wow.
Because they are Soviets, they don't care.
Right.
Ukrainians do care. They want to go to church and celebrate unofficially in a clandestine way without making a big fuss about it. And there was always a tension. They felt like, to say that phrase in Ukrainian, they would say, Совєти понавезли гівна на нашу голову, which loosely means Soviets brought all this crap on our heads. That's me. Because despite the fact that I was born in Lvov and my mom was born in Lvov, but we were like those bacteria of communist ideology. They are something foreign, something they want to rid themselves. Mm-hmm. Ukraine, by its geographical position, is between Russia and Poland, right. Two very strong empires who deny their identity. Russians say Ukrainians are spoiled Russians. They forgot they are Russians. They started talking those artificial languages. They don't exist. Polish would say they are schismatics, which means religious dissidents. According to Poles, which in interbellum controlled those territories. It's part of the Poland after the World War I, when Austria disintegrated. They would say, they recognize nothing but Catholicism in most pure way. So many Ukrainians in the West, they have that branch which is Greco-Catholic. Lviv is the only city in the world who has three kinds of Catholicism. Roman Catholic, Greek Catholic, Armenian Catholic. Wow. So three metropolises in one city. So Poles would terrorize them, trying to induce them to be Catholics. Russians would press them into being, in imperial times, Russians and Orthodox, in Soviet times, communists. Forget the religion. Although Stalin at some point started to play with religion, and he liquidated that Greco-Catholic metropolitan, gave it to Moscow Orthodox Church.
So the region of Ukraine has been contested over thousands of years. It seems
absolutely.
Like. So
not thousands, but hundreds.
Hundreds of years. Okay.
Yes.
So for hundreds of years, empires have pushed whatever they can to basically annex that region.
Yes, but there is a very important point I'd like to make, which explains a lot. When you're in that situation, when you're in between the hammer and anvil, between Warsaw and Moscow, what do? You seek allies. Outside that triangle, your ideal ally would be someone who is the enemy of Moscow and Warsaw. And who that be?
Right.
Germany.
Right.
So when the World War II started, their hopes were, at least on Western Ukraine, their hopes were with Hitler. They would see him as liberator from people like myself and, go back to where?
Yeah.
So a lot of, while some of us, have that ancestry connected to Red Army, mm-hmm. they have their own ancestry connected to nationalistic forces, which oftentimes allied with Hitler.
See, when you first started telling me about that, right, I was so surprised because when I first saw Vladimir Putin give his speech, mm-hmm. he was talking about denazifying Ukraine. And watching that, I was like, that's ridiculous. What is he talking about? Nazi influence. And you started to open up a little bit about how the border tensions have brought in somewhat of a mercenary army of unsavory characters willing to pick up the sword. And so, it was more of an arrangement of convenience rather than an arrangement of ideology. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It's well, where I come from, like from the world of the internet and blogging, there is a rule. If you compare your opponent to Hitler, you are the meme, the idiomatic expression, you are flushed. You have nothing, you done, you lost, you have nothing to say. If you say, oh, that's like Hitler, it's informal, but everybody understands that. So part of those accusations that it's Nazi regime, it's not entirely sincere. It's a Moscow propaganda, but it exists. It's not something they just made up. Because, like I keep my grandpa medals, a lot of Ukrainians, especially in the West, they keep medals of their ancestors for liberating Kyiv from Bolsheviks, which means like 27,000 of Jews killed there in Babi Yar in one location. That means Lvov pogrom with hundreds, thousands of people killed. On the other hand, before that pogrom happened, when Ukrainians came to Lvov with Germans, they found Ukrainian nationalists in Lvov prison like logs lying on prison yards. They've been all shot before the Reds left the city. So imagine growing up like that when your school friend, your grandpa was Red, your school friend's grandpa was in the forest fighting your grandpa.
Wow.
Basically. So that's the heritage. But there is also something else. There's not a big secret that there is neo-Nazi movement in the world. It's everywhere. Right. It's here. It's in England. It's in Germany. Everywhere. Right. And it's usually, big part of it has to do with football hooligans. Football, soccer. I mean, you call it soccer here in America. It's really foot and ball. Never understood that concept. How can
Most people don't.
How can you call football something where you do with your hands and call soccer something where you kick the ball with your legs? So that part of football or neo-football culture in many countries is neo-Nazi.
Why is that? I've never heard that before.
Big part of it, the sport and football is supposed to bring community together.
Yeah.
That means that you root for a team of people like you, from your country, from your city, from your plant, from your people like you. And I don't mean to say anything bad or good or give it an assessment, but it's a reality. In today's world where football is a commerce, you can find a team of France, which is not really a team of France, it's a team of Cameroon. They are excellent players, and they are great sportsmen, but a lot of young people see it and they cannot identify themselves with those teams. They start throwing bananas on the field. They start, and they feel urged to cover themselves with swastika, those tattoos, those skinhead movement. I don't have to tell you all that. So when you have a country in turmoil and civil war, it gets from hooliganism, from smashing cars and carving swastika on the fence, to killing people, to mutilating people, And that's what happened on eastern Ukraine. They did not, part of the population, which is Russian-leaning, did not accept nationalistic movement, which is, one of the leaders, whose name you're probably going to hear a lot, nationalistic leader, Stepan Bandera. I don't know if you have heard his name. And that guy embodies everything which is the most abominable in the world, in my opinion. He is nationalist, he is terrorist, and he is socialist. So he fancied himself a revolutionary. He did individual terror, killing Polish officials, all the usual that some people call it freedom fighters when it suits us, right? Or terrorists when it doesn't suit us. But either way, in my book, there is no such thing as good terrorist.
Yeah.
You shoot at non-combatants, I don't care what your reasons are.
Right.
So that they had that tradition of individual terrorism, of so-called expropriations, robbing banks. They did not take Polish rule well. They resisted it. They didn't take communist rule well. And when they started in 2014, encouraged by U.S. Embassy, you don't, when you want to do coup d'etat from the street, so-called colored revolution, who do you engage? You take people from piano school, you take people from art school. No, you take people on the street hooligans. So it happened, when it happened here, people shooting in police, beating policemen, setting them ablaze. A lot of people would say, "Oh, that's horrible." But then, when it happened in Kyiv, nobody really paid attention. How could you like insurgency there, but you say it's a fight for freedom? When it happens here, you say it's hooliganism, it's terrorism, it's horrible. Those people should be held accountable. So when it happened, when those people with those slogans started marching down the street with torches and Nazi.
You're talking about the Charlottesville
No,
march,
I'm talking
right?
about Kyiv right now.
Oh, Kyiv.
Yes,
Oh, wow.
I'm not talking about Charlottesville. We discuss trying to reason about Ukraine, how those.
So recently in Ukraine, men in hoods and Nazi regalia carried torches.
It's some people, moderates, they say it's a provocation. They say it's a Moscow set up to justify the invasion, to justify meddling. They are putting a show, and they creating either blindly or directly. They creating those extreme groups to justify intervention. But
So to be clear, what you're saying is you're not...
To some extent, it's possible.
Right.
It's known that some of them were just double agents or so. But you cannot say that the entire movement,
Right. That's what I'm getting to. Exactly.
far right-wing movement is a provocation. It's not. It's deeply rooted there, unfortunately, and it did a lot of damage to a fledgling Ukrainian state.
And it doesn't resemble the way Ukraine sees itself, right? This is fringe actors on Ukrainian soil. Every single country has them, and when they get propagandized from a media standpoint, people's assumption of the ideology that Ukraine believes in is associated with those groups. That's what you're saying? It became a tool rather than a shining example of Ukrainians.
When Woody Allen was asked, "What's your military profession?" he said, "Hostage." So when you have those small groups, small but very well organized, very well paid, and rampant, and they can terrorize people, you're afraid. They had the president hostage, who was panically afraid of small groups, despite of his popular support. And he was forced to pursue those policies which were not supported by most people, but rather by those small nationalistic groups. It's also a tragedy.
So when was this? The president was taken hostage?
No, not figuratively, politically.
Oh, I see.
Politically.
Yeah, okay, politically.
If you have, you know how those colored revolutions work.
Mm-hmm.
You have mobs, which go rampant. You have American embassy, which says, don't use force. Those are peaceful protesters, peaceful as in setting like what we had in Portland, pretty much here. So don't use force. Those are peaceful protesters. And those guys are afraid to use force because of Haag and Milosevic and those
Right.
examples.
Right.
That somebody would put them in the cage, and that's what's going to happen. They're afraid of that. So you become weary. You think, what if they come? They toppled previous guy. They can do it again. They can storm President's palace, and I cannot do much about it.
Yeah.
That's how. But again, it doesn't justify what happened
Right.
on the 24th. It's that there is no yes.
So it's interesting because the description of Ukraine it feels very young and in terms of its current identity and when its current identity took shape, right? And the identity I'm talking about is the identity that we're told, which is it's a free democratic state, right? It's a close ally to Western ideology, like Western thought, Western commerce, Western dress. It's almost as if it has been part of the EU, which it isn't.
Part of what?
The EU, which it
Oh,
isn't,
the
right?
European Union.
Which it isn't a member of, I believe. So what I'm saying is,
They will be tomorrow.
yeah, probably they've already put in a petition.
Right.
But my question is, when did this current state of Ukraine, this personality, when did that really start taking shape?
Personality in what way?
Personality, as in the way foreign governments view Ukraine, the way Ukraine views itself. Like from what I'm gathering from you, this seems like there's been multiple phases of development from Ukraine, right? There was
Right.
when it was part of the USSR until 1991, when it
Right.
became its own independent state. Would you say that 1991 was the date that Ukraine really changed into the Ukraine we know today?
No.
2014 maybe would be the year?
2014 is definitely, but I would say something. In my opinion, it's started. The whole thing started from Munich's speech of Putin. That's where the whole. If you need, it has very little to do with Ukraine itself. It has to do with Russia. I'm sure you know there is a definition in geopolitics called unacceptable enforcement. If you play a strategy game, there is a tale about traffic control policeman who would stop a car, and the guy asked, "Why did you stop me? I didn't do anything." And the guy says, "My family is not going to wait till you're going to do something." So when some part there is that Wilsonian notion, which was, I think, in different way defined by Woodrow Wilson and Leon Trotsky. They said the same thing practically. The world, Woodrow Wilson said, the world has to be safe for democracy, which means, in layman terms, if you cannot control something, it's a danger. Not because it actually does something, it's dangerous by the virtue that it's a force which you don't control. Who knows what it's going to do tomorrow? Today it's friendly, tomorrow it's not going to be friendly. Same thing Leon Trotsky said, you cannot build socialism or communism, his definition was, in one country. Because one country would be in hostile surrounding, you cannot do much. You have to have it in every place. The world has to be homogeneous. If it's not, you're always in danger. So when Russia, despite of what happened, disintegration of Soviet Union and all that, became unacceptably enforced, unacceptably strong, there was a U.S. Congress adopted a law which it's called support of democracy in Russia, which means we seek change of regime. Like in every place which is not under direct control. And Ukraine is the most natural crowbar to create a pressure point against Russia, to create something, a battling ram. It's the best.
And vice versa, right?
In what Ukraine never seeks a superpower status, so you don't have to
but I'm
worry
saying,
about it.
Right, but you're saying Western powers can use Ukraine as a natural crowbar to change the ideology in Russia.
Not to change the ideology.
Change the regime.
Change leadership.
Right,
Yes,
okay.
exactly.
So change leadership.
Right.
Would you say that it works the other way as well? That it's also a tool for Russia to use to change leadership in the Western nations?
Russia, that would be correct for early Bolshevik communist rule, except that it wasn't territorial. They would try to undermine Western countries through elites, through university professors, through peace movements, so-called, and so on and so forth, through Cambridge 5. That's how they would operate, not necessarily although after the war, yes, they created Warsaw Pact, and communists they demonstrated that will for expansion. Current Russian government and current leadership for the past 30 years to say they seek change to what?
They annexed Crimea.
Yes, when people say you mentioned something which is you want to hear about personal experiences.
Yeah,
people say annex Crimea in the same breath and in the same style. Putin annexed Florida, something which totally doesn't belong to them, have nothing to do with. They grabbed something which is not theirs. When I was a child, I was a sickling, not a strong, powerful Arnold Schwarzenegger that you see right now. So my parents took me to Crimea. It's like Florida. It's a warm place with a lot of resorts, and hopefully I'll get better. And I remember being in Sevastopol when I was 6 years old. There was not much to do. No casinos, no strippers, nothing. Very boring place at Soviet times. But I remember going in Sevastopol. I went to a high place and I saw Russian fleet in Sevastopol. It's a main base. It's like I was very proud to see the might of Russian fleet in the harbor and Russian flags. It's like Crimea to Russia. It's the same as Kosovo to Serbs. It's not real estate. It's not part of the territory. It's a cradle of civilization. Christianity came from Chersones, which was part of the at the time.
So when Russia
and also I want one more point. I'm sorry. And there is another place there in Sevastopol is a display dedicated to Crimean War. It was also tragic events. Then events of Great Patriotic War against Hitler. It's a sacred place. To see, I love Ukraine. To me, it's Ukrainian language and Russian language is the same. I know as many songs and poems in Ukrainian as I know in Russian. It's no difference. I love Ukraine. It's like it's my mother. Russia is my father. Одесса, мама, Ростов, отец. Кто тронет Леву, тому. Odessa is my mother, Rostov is my father. If you touch me, you're gonna regret it. So, yes. So you were asking.
Yeah, my curiosity was, how did the average Ukrainian respond to when the Crimea, and I'm saying that correctly, right?
Crimea. It's always, yes, Crimea. Yes.
When the Crimea was annexed, what was the average Ukrainians'
If
response?
if you have Ukrainian national ideology, if you are part of that narrative,
Right.
of course you're gonna react. You're gonna feel humiliated. Something was taken from you. Although, in many instances, I told them, Ukrainian friends, when I had them, I met last time I think we met in Munich. And I had a long conversation with some national-minded Ukrainians, and I told them, "Don't build empire. What you're trying to do, if you're trying to build something like Poland, with one ethnic group, one religion, and they proclaimed that одна мова, одна віра, одна армія, one language, one religion, one army. You don't have to try to hold on to those territories with people with different language, different world outlook, different, like you need de Gaulle. You need to give up Algeria to save France. You cannot.
But isn't it more complicated than that, right? Because, I mean, how long did they really have the Crimea to themselves?
This is what people should understand. They never had, they had it for
since 91.
Yes, exactly.
It's a very short amount of time. That's not even two
question,
generations.
It's like who would guard the guardians? It's more the conceptual question which has no answer, really.
Right.
Because if you were part of the Soviet Union, where all borders were administrative, and you received certain territories which were part of administrative division, when you leave, like, can you really you leave with all those territories that you acquired while being in the family? If you have, if you divorce, can you take the dowry with you, which was given to you upon the condition of marriage and staying together?
So you're saying the Crimea was given to Ukraine to marry the region of Ukraine to the USSR?
Not just to marry, to give that population, to dilute. That's what they don't understand, that they were not given territory. They were given territory and population.
Right.
Same thing, those regions of Donbass, Donetsk. Lenin and Stalin, Bolshevik leaders, felt that they have to dilute that hostile, property-minded population who likes his garden, likes his house, his orchard. They should become more proletariat. That slogan that proletariat has only their working hands and nothing else. So that population of those regions, which was for the most part proletarian, they acquired, with those territories, they acquired millions and millions of Russian-speaking, proletarian-minded, communist-minded, Russian-leaning people. How fair it is if you recognize a right of Ukrainians not to live under Moscow rule, which I do. How fair it is to force millions of Russians to live under Kyiv's rule. It's where it ends, where it starts. And
it's an interesting dilemma. It sounds almost like Gaza Strip.
Gaza Strip? In
right.
What way?
So, well, ethnically diverse, contested between different ethnic groups.
Gaza. You know that I was serving in Gaza for a year.
No, I didn't know that.
No, I was serving.
Really?
Yes, I know. I don't know why you brought this up, but
because it's a contested piece of land where
it's not. I'm gonna tell something also not that many people know.
Okay.
The whole policy of Israel since they captured Gaza was to give it away. The last time it was discussed with Anwar Sadat after the Yom Kippur War, and you know what his response was?
What?
You created that expletive, and you're gonna eat it. I'm not taking it. Same thing with Jordan, like they were trying to give them West Bank. They're not contesting. They don't want a pirate state there. They don't want those people, justly or not, to have their own state. They want West Bank to be a part of Jordan and Gaza Strip to be a part of Egypt, but Egypt refuses to take it. So that I don't, the only reason I brought this up is that I don't see that analogy between Gaza and those territories. A lot of post-Soviet republics, instead of making a success story, got engaged with territorial claims. We just had another war, which I'm sure you and our viewers know about, between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Right.
Absolutely needless, absolutely pointless. Clinging to the territory instead of investing. A poor country like Armenia, which has no oil, no gas, agricultural practically state, cleaning instead of making a success, making a showcase, making a success story and independence. When you at war, you cannot have independence. You depend on your senior partners. Armenia lost because of that clinging to the territory. Armenia lost independence. Depends heavily on Russia right now, and Azerbaijan lost independence. It's a part of Turkey practically right now. So that nationalistic narrative that we're not gonna, you want to be a Russian, get a suitcase, go to Russia. You want to be something else, it's.
But don't you have to draw the line somewhere? Because, I mean, this is why I'm actually comparing it a little bit to the West Bank, is because if you keep zooming out from the historical timeline, there's an argument on the other side, and then you zoom out further, and then it's back to an argument on the other side, and it just kind of seems like a constant cultural and territorial dispute, right?
Yes.
I understand what you're saying, that a sovereign human being, and especially when they become a collective group of similarly minded individuals, are naturally more inclined to veer towards the direction of where they're naturally inclined to. And that's what you're saying. The Crimea is more naturally Russian than it is Ukrainian. But at the time, the Crimea was a part of the Ukrainian state, right?
Ukrainian Republic, which was part of the Soviet Union.
And that's their form of government, is a republic, Republican democracy?
Yes. By constitution, yes.
And
Republican democracy.
Who founded that? Was that by the help of the Warsaw Pact, basically picking a buffer zone that has democratic ties?
Who defined the border, you mean?
No, their form of government.
The form
Democratic
of government,
Republic.
The form of government was created like that because of Gorbachev reforms. But as far as borders, the founder is Lord Curzon. He drew that line to which Stalin later moved. It's line of Curzon.
Yeah.
That's the West recognized that's where Russia ends. That's where Eastern Europe begins. But then nobody, unfortunately, upheld that. And the Russians were trying to create puppet states in Eastern Europe. And after the fall of Soviet Union, it went the other way. So if you're seeking analogy, the best analogy would be Poland. It's a unique place in the world. Poland, before the war, if we're talking about 1930s, the 10% of population was Jewish, 20% Ukrainian, 2 million Germans. In Poland, no, I'm sorry, made a mistake. Million Germans in Poland, 2 million Poles in Germany. Today, they have 98% of the population Polish. 98%
Wow.
Roman Catholic. It's
Wow.
unique.
Yeah.
They created, that's what they strived. They said, even before they gained independence, Polish nationalists said, we're not bound by any abstract notions like equity of people, or it's Poland for Poles. So now, how can you explain the fact that American ruling class, for example,
Right.
which denies any identity? I just came from Vermont. All churches with no crosses. How can you explain that very same ruling class supports a religious conservative movement, supports those anti-Russian fighters that have Virgin Mary on their rifle butts, and they call battalion of Virgin Mary, like Poles, like 50 years early. The ideology is incompatible. If they prevail, West would never allow Ukrainians to be Ukrainian. They do not accept those woke ideas that we have here. So, if the objective is nationalism is suppressed here. Can you declare yourself a nationalist here and still keep your job in today's United States?
No, it's definitely considered a alt-right dirty word, and it's also usually coupled with discussions of like Nazi rhetoric and things like that.
No, even without any Nazi reference.
No, I'm saying that's how people take it now.
If you say here, my European Christian. By the way, I'm not Christian, as you know, but I recognize people's right for integrity of their culture. If you say, I'm proud of being European, I'm proud of being Christian, I want my Christmas tree, I want my Christmas with Christ,
right.
How long do you think you're going to keep your job? Mm-hmm. How long are you going to be on social networks? So how do you explain that those very same people, those very same political leaders, like Biden, like Kamala Harris, like the squad, support those forces in Ukraine? There's only one explanation. It's a battling ram against Russia. What if tomorrow Russia pulls back and they prevail? They gonna do the same. They're not gonna allow Ukrainians to remain Ukrainians. They're gonna do the same thing to them they do in Pakistan. We need 70 gender identities. We need to do something, about it. People not being nationalist, not being Christian in a traditional way. So that's the root of the problem. But to say that those means that were chosen on the 24th to do something about it, they have no justification. It sounds like contradiction, but that's the way I feel.
Yeah.
They shouldn't have done what they did.
So,
they did.
It's an interesting argument, right? It's here in the United States, we essentially have a series of ideas that group people together. And it's because of those ideas that it usually doesn't matter what your ethnicity is, right? Or what your beliefs are. They could be drastically different, right? Like, for example, beliefs in Atlanta, Georgia are very different than beliefs in, Kentucky, or even outside of Atlanta in rural Georgia are very different than New York City. Yet we find some sort of common ground with these set of ideas that we wrote down in the Constitution.
Right.
Would you say that the law of the land in Eastern Europe is more of a emphasis on their ethnic backgrounds as to what unifies them instead of a set of ideas? Is that a uniquely American thing that we try to put on other people and other nations, right? Like, well, why? Because I hear you talk about Crimea, right? Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting argument saying that they lean more Russian, so why shouldn't they want to do that? But I can't say for certain that they did want to do that. And it was sovereign land for Ukraine. And where do you draw the line, right, to what's ethically okay and not? And that's a very difficult thing to answer.
I don't know. When you
Right.
start talking ethics, I don't really know where to draw the line.
Yeah.
All I know is there are different places with different significance.
Right.
If you think about something which is a cradle of your civilization, cradle of your pride, you have those narratives which connect you to that place, victories, defeats, military graveyards, the fleet. It's all you or many. I don't know. You've never been to Sevastopol, right?
No, and Sevastopol is the biggest city in Crimea, right?
Yes,
it's a harbor city.
It's a harbor city. It's a naval base, and with all my love of Ukraine, I asked myself in 1991, and I remember myself as a child working next to Nakhimov's monument. It's an admiral from Crimean War. 3 admirals who died during the siege of Sevastopol, and there is a church where they buried. So I was happy for Ukrainians to gain independence.
Right.
I thought, I grew up, I heard them. For me, unfortunately, they were oftentimes them. And I heard how much they would love to get their own state, about their aversion and incompatibility with Moscow. And I was, I commiserated, and I thought, yeah, someday they definitely should have a state. I wouldn't want Russian flag in Lviv. I think it was nonsense. It was a mistake, because Ukrainians in Lviv did not want to be part of Russia, do anything with Russia. And public sentiment was very strong. They saw us as Russian-speaking people, despite the fact that we all spoke Ukrainian without any problem. But they saw us as foreigners. And I felt happy for them when they gained independence. But then I asked myself, do you really want a blue and yellow flag on next to that church? It's a Kosovo scenario. It's this absolutely same scenario. It was, we spoke about it, that Kosovo to Serbs is the same as Jerusalem for Jews. It's not the loss of territory, it's loss of heart. You tear heart from the nation. That's how Serbs are now. Think about sovereignty of Yugoslavia, for example, or sacred borders, international law, all that. Where did it go when Clinton was bombing Yugoslavia? So Crimea to Russia and to Russian narrative, it's for Turks, it's a place of defeat, of the tragedy. For Russians, it's a place of glory for the most part in many wars, and it's strategic point, and you have, like in computer games, those crossed swords. A lot of crossed swords. Balaclava, Sevastopol, all those places. I've seen in London also those memorials of fallen in Balaclava. So I couldn't bring myself, despite all my love for Ukraine, to imagine that Ukrainian flag where it doesn't really belong. So, and I lost a lot of Ukrainian friends over that.
Yeah.
Felt that it should be independent Ukraine should be in borders of Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Stalin was a bad guy, so was Lenin. Terrible. They ruined their monuments, but they won territories that they gained because of them. So
how much
tragic.
Yeah. How much strategic significance does the harbor of can you help me pronounce that city name? Sevastopol?
Sevastopol.
Sevastopol.
Yeah.
So Sevastopol.
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 No T. Yeah.
Okay. Sevastopol. How much strategic significance does that harbor city hold in terms of being able to connect to international trade for the Ukrainian region? Because you know I like maps, and you know I study ancient warfare, and you know I like ancient histories and battles.
Right.
So because of my research into different wars and battles, sometimes it's just as simple as playing chess. Or a game of Risk, to where you can cut off important geographical locations just by proximity.
That, yes.
So I always looked at that city, Sevastopol, as their main harbor city. And although there may be some ethnic differences and some belief differences in the span of 30 years or so, which is really nothing, as a nation state, Ukraine, that is an incredibly important location. Is that an accurate assessment? How cut off are they now?
You see, no, they have ports. They have Odessa. Now they're probably going to lose it, unfortunately. But Sevastopol is not as much of a commercial port. It's a naval base, one of the biggest in the world. Naval and airspace base. During the World War II, like, since you like war maps, Hitler couldn't take Moscow because he diverted his entire army, the best army, Manstein, Field Marshal Manstein's army, for siege of Sevastopol. That's how it is important.
Wow.
It's a base. If Russia loses that base, they have to go to Kerch in Novorossiysk, which is, by installations, by logistics, by infrastructure, it's no match for Sevastopol. So the importance of Sevastopol, it's a base of Black Sea Fleet. That's so naturally, if you are adverse to Russia, you want to deprave them from that naval
Pinching
base.
off that gateway,
Right.
right? It's almost like a Pillars of Heracles, almost.
As far as commercial, Odessa is more important for commercial traffic.
There's a lot of rumors going on, right, between this war. You know, one of my stepbrother is a reporter for a very prominent news organization, so I always default information I find to be vetted by him. And one of the things that I came across this morning was a list of the most viewed videos and the most viewed...
Me?
No. Right. The most viewed propaganda material, basically encouraging those that are rooting for the Ukrainian forces to feel emboldened and flip them on their head. A lot of interesting conversations there, right? And it's really exposing in the digital age the way information is delivered to us and its intended effect. My question for you is, you've seen some of these videos. You've seen maybe the video of the fighter jet very low, close to the residential area, launching 2 missiles before pulling up.
Yep.
Apparently, and this is unconfirmed by no sources of mine, but apparently that was a Ukrainian jet shooting at Russian forces. So, you know, my question is, with your ties to Ukraine, are you able to pierce that veil? Are you able to see through it in a distance, or are you hearing anything from people that you may be familiar with?
I don't use rumors. I use only reliable sources. And it's not only trains. It's also in summer I go to the beach and I hear what people say. So it's impossible in every, there is a lot of fake. There is a lot of propaganda on both sides.
I'm sure.
Even for people, I do have some connections with people who sit there. They themselves are struggling to understand what's going on. You cannot trust, of course, official Russian sources. You cannot trust official Ukrainian sources. People are trying to fill the gap by putting videos on social media, which
Right.
is also impossible to understand oftentimes. What I can say for sure, there are casualties among civilians. There are horrible stories about young people dying. It's unavoidable in this. And like I said, this invasion in that form should never have happened.
Of course.
Despite of the logic and grievances that Russia might have and what they are trying to assert, and Russia was treated unfairly all those years. They've been treated like defeated enemy without West really winning any battles any place. I'm not aware, but
there were a few, but I know what you mean. Right. The brunt of World War II was on Russia.
No,
and Russia
I'm saying about after the fall of Soviet Union, George Bush, the elder, declared they scored a victory.
Right.
They won. I to this day, I don't understand how.
But it's a different kind of war, isn't it? It's more of a acquiescence of thought, right? And you succeed in enough regions to flip the chess pieces in your favor that you don't have to have it shooting.
You, as an expert in internet, you are in international history. How many chess pieces were flipped which way before 1985? Only Grenada comes to mind. Every single place.
Well, I'm not an expert, first of all.
Well,
so
you're a connoisseur. Let's put it this way. You do know those facts that before 1985, every single place you're going to mention, Korea, Vietnam, practically everywhere, except for Grenada, every country was flipping communist, was flipping red.
It's true.
Nicaragua, Cuba, Ethiopia, you name it. Yemen. So there was no reason to say that the West flipped more pieces. But if you and I are in conflict, and at some point I say, okay, let's put the end, let's reconcile, let's...
you don't put a finger in the eye. That's what you're saying.
Right.
You don't put a finger in the eye.
You don't say, okay, I won. You don't say, this is my victory. Somebody's disinclination to perpetuate that strife and hatred and trying to take more conciliatory approach like Gorbachev did.
Right.
It was taken as a sign of weakness, and we have a defeated enemy, which we have to which we have to press all the way. There was no military victory. There was no sign that a lot of third world countries flipped the other way. Until Reagan came to power, it was like defeat on practically every corner of the world.
But hasn't the majority of the relationship between...
But
let me just check something real quick. Okay. It's always been my understanding that the relationship between the United States and Russia has always been kind of this like brotherly thing. Because in a lot of ways, I see a tremendous amount of similarity between the Russian frontier spirit and the American frontier spirit.
Right.
And so what's interesting is the way that each checks the other. Right. It's almost like you come to an agreement, and then after the agreement's done, both sides are allowed some semblance of throwing sand in the person's eye. Like it's a little bit of it's a little bit of like sticking their nose out at each other, sticking their tongues at each other after the fact. And it seemed that most policy was constructed that way, where they allow the other to go a little bit beyond the line that they legally defined so that the egos aren't so bruised, right?
You're talking about America when it existed.
Oh, you don't think America exists?
Well, I remember, like from the personal standpoint, back in later 80s and
Just bring this up closer to your face.
sorry.
Yeah. No, it's okay. You can pull the whole thing to you if you need.
Okay. 80s and 90s, there was a cult-like following of America in Russia. Cult-like. American jeans, American Coca-Cola, McDonald's. Pop groups would sing American Boy, ujedu s tobой. American Boy, I'm going to run away with you. It was amazing. It took some kind of a genius to instill that spite and hatred of everything American in just 20 years. Yeah. But, I wasn't born here, as you know. I made the choice to become an American because I was attracted. I thought by watching American movies, reading books about America, I thought this place is beautiful. Pink Cadillacs, Elvis, Frank Sinatra, Marilyn Monroe, the beauty. If somebody told me back then, hey, when I arrived, I said it's a Columbus Day for me. It was in June, but no, I'm sorry, it was in April. But I say I'm Columbus. I'm boarding a new world, new shore. If somebody told me that the mob would be able to tear down a monument of Christopher Columbus here in America, throw it to the river, and nothing would happen, and the speaker of our Congress would say, I don't care about the statues. You tell me America still exists? And people are watching. Imagine what they see there.
Yeah.
The problem is not that we're trying to assert our influence in Ukraine, in Russia, in Arab world.
Yeah, we didn't invade.
I'm all for it.
Right.
We didn't invade in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya. We never invaded anything. But it's good we are asserting influence. Trouble is we stop being attractive to the rest of the world. And Ukrainians also see what's going on. What happened here in 2020 in the summer, you and I were here. We saw it with our own eyes. When people see what happens, do you think that place where we sit now looked like Stalingrad with boards and every single window shut?
I don't disagree with you that it's definitely a stain in a lot of different ways, right? But more importantly, I always look at history kind of like an EKG, right? There are peaks and valleys.
What is it? Oh,
yeah, like when you have a heart monitor,
right?
Mm-hmm. So there's always going to be moments of extremes. The question is, when you iron it out over 100 years, over the span of a single lifetime, what's the story then, right? Mm-hmm. And the interesting story between Russia and America over, maybe 100 years, we've been kind of locked in, horns locked a little bit.
200 years.
At the end of the day, we find some common ground. At the end of the day, we find some semblance of, we're not going to escalate it to nuclear. Even during the Cold War, truly, it didn't turn out to be a shooting war when it could very easily have gone that way. And one side acquiesced without needing a shooting war.
Yes, but now it's different. It's not different in terms of nuclear war possibility. I don't believe it, although on 23rd I did not believe in invasion. Yes, I unfortunately, I think of myself as very perceptive, and time and again I missed the target. But when there was a Cold War, when there was that Caribbean crisis and all of those things, we were on the verge of nuclear war, but there was a mutual respect. Kennedy respected. He probably hated. Khrushchev hated Kennedy, but with hate came respect. I can't imagine personal sanctions against Khrushchev. Or against Stalin. Like Churchill, who wasn't biggest fan of communism, or Stalin. I can't imagine personal sanctions. When you do personal sanctions against the leader, it's like Byzantine Tsar. You show you are inferior. I'm gonna punish you. When they don't believe themselves, that leaders, they say it's largely symbolic. But what kind of symbolism? They don't believe Putin is gonna actually go shopping to Milano by himself, underwear, or that he keeps money in British banks. They don't believe it. They say it's symbolic. But what kind of symbolism? What are you trying to say? That you are inferior. You're not equal. And then you put an onus on someone to prove that, in fact, I am equal. I'm going to show it to you. And it's very different, that sense of the end of history. We won. Game over.
So you're saying there's a resentment, and maybe we've pushed it over the edge?
Yes, resentment, which was...
With sanctions?
With personal sanctions.
And that caused the Russian... what's the name of their currency?
Ruble.
The ruble, okay, right. The ruble dropped 30%.
So it's gonna drop. They're gonna have a lot of problems with sanctions, because they were trying for 10 years. They were trying to join the World Trade Organization.
Of course, and the
that.
I think it's called the Novoro pipeline from
Yes,
from Russia past Norway and Sweden towards Germany.
Yes,
the Nova 2 or something.
No,
like that.
it's Nord Stream.
The Nord Stream.
Yes,
that's
in
right.
German, Nord Stream. Putin was able to hedge that. It's going.
Oh, it's back up now?
No, it's going to China.
No way. He rewrote the path to China?
No. Nord Stream 2 is stopped.
Right,
course,
yeah.
But he has, between China, Pakistan, and Vietnam, they're gonna buy as much gas and oil as they want.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because there's a belief here that cutting off Russia to the Western to Western commerce and trade is a death sentence. But looking at the way the maps are shaped, China and Russia, most of China's wilderness and most of Russia's wilderness are side by side, right? So their backs are to each other, and they're facing in opposite directions, right? The majority of the major cities for Russia are always more towards the west. That's realistically where the majority of the wealth is for them. Whereas east, the majority of their wealth is towards the eastern coast and southern coast, correct? So there's a little bit of like a wilderness connection there. It's my belief that Russia and China are almost allying economically in a way that is almost like Americans are deluded about. Because most conversation that I overhear is that, man, they're not going to do that. Russia isn't connected with China economically. But wouldn't that make the most sense? And have you heard anything specific that's implying that they can shoulder these economic sanctions? Because the reality is the majority of their investment is a, China-Russian economic alliance.
Someday, if you feel like inviting me again, which I hope you will, we can talk more about how it happened, that triangle, US, China, and Russia or Soviet Union. I think that in order to understand what happens here, and I'm as a US citizen and a person who spent most of his lifetime here, I'm more concerned about this country. People have to. China is the hottest topic. You open any network and people talk about China. It's important to understand what happened. And as of right now, it's the biggest price that Putin and Russia have to pay for what they did. They become a minor partner of China. After Vietnam, after sign of Vietnam War of 1979, China decided...
If you have to cough, just cough away from the microphone if you can. Yeah.
Sorry.
You're good.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Decided not to fight anymore. and they decided to assert themselves without wars. They discovered they are not good in war because Vietnamese taught them a lesson at some point. So, yeah, they right now they're adding a city every year, million people city every year. The wilderness becomes not wilderness anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There was an old joke back in the 80s about Russian and Americans having a meal at the same table, and it's basically dry bread, and Russian says, "This is consequences of your arms race," and the American says, "Those are consequences of your disarmament." And then Chinese guy comes, "Okay, guys, dinner is over. Back to your cells." So
Yeah.
everybody was trying to play, and Richard Nixon, no, not Richard Nixon, I'm sorry, Henry Kissinger, he's still going around very proud about how he played Chinese card. He very art of diplomacy. In reality, of course, it's Mao who played both Soviets and Americans. So it's Putin's accomplishment. He hedged his bets. He's not going to collapse because of oil and gas imports stopped. They're going to go eastward. But he becomes dependent on China. When you start the war like that, you become dependent on your senior partner.
A friend of mine has a family stuck in Odessa. I did everything I could to help her move them as quickly as we could to the border of Moldova. However, when her family first arrived, the individuals at the border would refuse the men from being able to cross into Moldova.
Which individuals? Who are they?
I don't know which border patrol. It could be Moldovan or it could be Ukrainian. But the way it was suggested is that it was Ukrainian border patrol that's refusing to have any men of fighting age leave the country.
If they are
fighting
Ukrainian
age.
citizens,
Right.
that's true.
That is true.
I can confirm that. Yes.
So when a government pulls a move like that, in your mind, is that an act of desperation?
No, it's a draft.
Right.
Like in every country would do the same. The draft.
In your opinion, the news is basically saying that the Ukrainians have been successfully repelling multiple invasions into Kyiv and I think Odessa as well. They've been deterring. From what you've heard, do you believe the accuracy of those statements that the mighty Russian and Belarusian army have been stopped?
Like I said, it's difficult for me to say anything specific, but I can say absolutely that this invasion is not going the way it was intended by Moscow. And two things did not happen. Which Moscow was counting on.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody, maybe a group of politicians or paramilitary leaders associated with so-called Russian Spring, they convinced him that general population of Ukraine would be greeting Russian troops with flowers as their liberators. Did not happen. Second thing, that there will be mass betrayal and desertion on the part of Ukrainian army. That they only waiting for the moment they're going to run away. And
it's been the opposite, right? The rumors have been that Russians
yes.
have been leaving their tanks and trucks.
No, I don't know. I cannot confirm that. There might be cases like that, but
Right.
You can say with 100% certainty that Ukrainians put a fight. They stay united. There is no switching sides. There's no turncoats, nothing that we saw in 2014, crowds waving Russian flags. Nothing of the kind happens in Russian cities. So yes, they are fighting. The president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, who is professional comedian, an actor.
Wait, the president of Ukraine?
Yes.
You think is a professional comedian?
I don't think I admired him for many years as an actor.
What? He's like the Ronald Reagan of Ukraine, started out as an actor.
Except that Ronald Reagan had a period of maybe 20 or 30 years after finishing his movie career. He became a politician, trade union leader, governor. This guy, directly from stand-up comedy, became a president.
No way.
The very next day, after playing piano with you-know-what on television, he became a president. Everybody was so tired of politicians, of professional politicians, of bureaucracy, of corruption. They thought it's going to be refreshing to have an actor as a president. I was very critical about him. I think he was incompetent. He was a hostage. He did nothing to rule in those far-right extremists. As of right now, he's acting with much valor and diligence and devotion. He stayed in Kyiv.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Despite, he, like Stalin in a way, refused to leave Moscow.
Walks among the men.
Right.
Inspiring them.
Despite being a target and cities besieged and encircled.
Yeah.
So, yes, you can say that Ukrainians did put a fight. It was unexpected. Everybody, including Western experts, said 2 days it's going to collapse. Now we are day 6 and there is no collapse.
Right.
There are negotiations that started.
Ceasefire just was brought up in Belarus. Well, no, they haven't signed it, but they asked Belarus to host a ceasefire.
So yeah, I think the military side, the logistic side of the invasion failed so far. It doesn't mean they're gonna prevail, but the longer it takes, it was supposed to be a blitzkrieg.
Right.
The longer it takes, the more difficult it is for Russians.
For sure. Now, knowing what you know about Vladimir Putin, and when I say knowing what you know, basically being able to understand him in his mother tongue when he has conversations with world leaders at G8 summit or when he's talking at the World Economic Forum, all of these larger international meetings, you're able to actually hear from the horse's mouth, his inflection, his emphasis, and gather information to his personality. Very few people have that type of insight.
I wouldn't say I'm privy to...
Well, you understand him better than I right? And the average American.
To some extent, yes, but I'm not part of his inner circle.
No, of course not. I don't mean to suggest that. But my question is, in your belief, if you were to succeed in taking Kyiv and taking Odessa, do you think he's going to stop at Ukraine?
In what do you mean? No, of course not. He's not going to stop. There is a next obvious target that you just mentioned.
Moldova.
There are 2 ways to go from Ukraine. Either going north for Baltic states, which is problematic because
NATO.
Yes, exactly. Moldova is strange thing happened there. They started the whole independence drive, Moldovan nationalists.
When was this? Recently?
1991.
Oh, the same time.
Okay. Saying, we are Armenians. There is no such thing as Moldovans. We are Armenians. We need to join our motherland. 30 years later, they didn't do it. It was it was a huge mistake on one hand. On the other hand, they didn't want to do it because Romania already had a president. Why would they want another president? The whole bureaucracy is going to lose positions. They don't need the second set of bureaucracy in Romania. But by not joining Romania, they exposed to take over. The part of Transnistria, that part, it's already under Russian control. They can easily go to Chisinau and try and take over.
So your expectation is
happened 3 times already. Besides those people, those people who encouraged Putin to do what they did, people associated with, let's call them Russian Spring Order, for a better word, lack of better terminology. They are connected to that Bessarabia fight back in the 90s. The whole insurgency, the whole Russian Volunteer Corps, and all that, it started there. So it has sentimental value, if anything, for them. They started fighting there. Those who are fighting in Donbass right now, it's all started there. So yeah, it's if he called disintegration of Soviet Union the biggest geopolitical tragedy in the world, in world history, although I disagree. I think the biggest geopolitical tragedy is 4th of July. Division between England and...
Greatest day ever.
Okay, if you think so. I am the son of 3 peoples: Jewish, Russian, English. Those who poisoned the rest of the world. So it's not actually my idea. It's one of the greatest ethnographers, Fraser, said that it was a catastrophe. Imagine what kind of empire or what kind of capability would be for English-speaking world to stay united. But we strayed away from...
in a lot of ways, we are united. We are.
That's another great topic about America is anti-Europe. We touched a bit once, I remember. But let's talk about our subject. Then restoration of the Soviet Union in the borders of 1977 would be his perceived goal, which was for everybody before him. Russian people are like Jews. You cannot destroy them. If you destroy every single Russian, the very next day, somebody would come up and say, I'm Russian. Russians lost their statehood at some point, and yet they rebuilt. They always come back because there's some mystical reason.
You're talking about the Viking invasion?
No, not Viking invasion. It was Polish invasion. When at the beginning of 17th century, Russia lost their statehood. Poles captured Moscow, put their own king there. For no reason, somehow came back. After October Revolution, same thing. Old country totally collapsed, the empire, and they come back. So now they are going back to Curzon line. If they succeed at this generation, I don't know. I don't know what he's gonna do if he captures Kyiv. The next question would be what his plan is.
After that, right.
After that.
Because that's essentially toppling Ukraine. If he captures Kyiv, it's essentially
I don't know.
Cutting the head off the snake in a way.
Yes, but he has 2 options. He can install friendly government using anti-Maidan opposition, which exists there.
Okay.
People who are unhappy with current government and current direction, nationalistic direction.
So form an independent state, not
Yes,
directly under the
yes,
statehood of Russia,
exactly.
but basically a puppet state.
No, that's what I was about to say.
Oh.
Either you create a friendly state or you create a puppet state.
Right.
If you bring, and there unfortunately...
Aren't they the same thing?
No.
Really?
Those forces which were opposed to current direction, anti-Maidan, anti-2014. They are opposed to it, but they are Ukrainians. They still value Ukrainian statehood, Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian independence. And if he relies on them, maybe somehow both Ukraine and Russia can get out of this mess. Unfortunately, what I learned 2 days ago is not encouraging. A guy, one of the leaders of Russian Spring, who was sitting in Crimea all these years, is moving toward Kyiv, which would say, which would imply that he has some role in the new government. If Putin wants to put those guys in charge, it's not going to be a government, it's going to be a commandature.
A puppet
It's going to
state.
be puppet state.
And who is this individual?
His last name is Tsarov.
Sadov.
Tsarov, yes.
And
He's one of the leaders who were opposing, talented person, charming person, but he is not a Ukrainian-minded person. He is totally dependent on Moscow, and he would not have any legitimacy there. It's if he is put in charge, or people like him, there is somebody named Gubarev, they are moving, supposedly they are moving toward Kyiv in anticipation of this storm. If they are put in charge, that means that Putin decided to rely on direct military suppression. There will be no way out of this. We're going to have the same, like we have Palestinian issue, we have Northern Ireland issue, we have Basque issue, we're going to have a Ukrainian issue with terrorism and around the world. Ukrainian nationalists are no strangers. Terrorism, they know how to do it. Individual terrorism, all that.
Well, I know we can dive into more details of this subject for many, many hours, but I appreciate you.
Totally.
Thank you so much for this time. And I do think we'll do another episode at some point.
Thank you.
I'm curious to see how this develops, and your knowledge of and your insight into, foreign policy is definitely a unique one. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you
the
for
show.
having me.
Of course.
Nice to be here.
Of course. And where's a good place that our viewers can find any of your work?
I'm launching a new channel in April or March. Totally something very new, something nobody, different direction. It's not gonna be about Eastern Europe or Ukraine. It's called Restoration, but it's gonna definitely touch on the subjects of Cold War, on that Russia, China, US triangle, and in general, exploring how we got to that state of affairs that we are now, discussing roots of what happened, going back maybe centuries.
Mm-hmm.
I did a lot of work researching it, from Edgar Allan Poe, from founding fathers, trying to see the popular word is systemic, trying to figure out what systemically went wrong. Why am I not enjoying that quality of life that I was hoping for?
Mm-hmm.
Not a young man anymore. Moving to Zimbabwe is not an option. So yes, so I'm gonna, when I'm ready to launch, I'll introduce.
Be sure to let us know, and of course, we'll support the show in the best way we can. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.